All right. All righty, everybody. Should we start with prayer?
Yeah, it's a good idea. I'll go ahead and say it. Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this day, and we're thankful for the opportunity we have to meet together to go over the topics in this class, and especially the important topic of ethics. And we're thankful for the opportunity that we have to attend BYU, Idaho, to further our education and to follow thy direction. Please bless us with thy spirit and also with increased understanding and the ability to learn the subject we cover. And bless those that aren't able to make it, that they'll be able to be here next week. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 Okay, so I guess we just go over our topics and then, because this week's different, we didn't have like a assigned thing, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
No, it says to go over the examples that we had.
Okay,
So I can go first.
go ahead.
Yep, find it real quick. So I did mine on, what is it? No, guys. Okay, I did mine on discounting. About how you don't really worry about the future consequences. So my example was that I was on my mission and my knee started hurting, and I just kind of let it go like I didn't really care, because I don't like doctors. So then I let it get worse, and then the doctors told me that it's going to take longer to fix. So, yeah.
That's good.
Okay, I'll go ahead and go next. Mine was more ambiguity. And so at work, I'm not going to read it because I know it pretty well. We had what we call a fleet optimization. I work for Pepsi, so we have lots of trucks and trailers that we use. And so corporate decided we needed to get rid of a bunch of equipment. We had more than what we really needed. And so while we were doing the audit, we had two departments auditing what the needs were, the sales department. And the sales department wanted to keep more assets than they currently had, with projections going towards future sales and routes. Whereas the fleet department said we could get rid of a bunch of equipment because they weren't utilizing the equipment we had. So we were both having the same data, but interpreting it differently. In the end, the fleet department won out for the most part because we had more data backing up our position and the reason to get rid of equipment than the sales department had to keep it. So.
So mine, I did mine on like the familiarity with like being biased, and I'm studying construction management. So I've had opportunities to like interview with other companies, like larger companies, and I've also had the opportunity to like with local companies, construction companies. And when I'm doing with companies that I am not familiar with, it's always a little different with the interview process. And then as I interview with people that I know, and it's actually like a really easy interview just because I know them, and so they can look back on my past and they know who I am and stuff. So yeah.
Okay, I guess I can go. I can't remember which one this is, but I put John recently becomes a part owner of a farm that has been farming for years. The farm uses tractors made by Case. Even though they cost more, John believes that they should purchase John Deere tractors because he believes they are better and will produce a better yield, even though there is no evidence that there is a yield increase. I think that falls under bias, right?
Yeah, he's biased towards John Deere.
Yeah. Okay.
Mine. So mine was an example of attachment. I saw in my life. So I said, as I worked as a waitress, I wanted to stay in certain people's good graces, knowing the end result would be a bigger tip. So I did this, giving more attention to regular clients that came in and to people that had or looked like they had more money to spend. That's mine.
Sweet.
I think that's pretty good. We hit all four kinds of bias she wanted.
Thanks. Doing great so far. So are we just supposed to kind of go over these questions that she has for us? Want to talk about the article, or does anybody have any opinions about it? You can ask. It has this question I think I can bring up. It says, since lawyers are advocates for their clients, lawyers are affected by the bias. My thinking was, I feel like if you're hired by a client, you need to be biased in some sort of a way to help your client out a little bit, wouldn't you? To help advocate for your client.
I don't know. I could see it. I think from my perspective, with a big international corporation, I feel like when we want them to be more biased against us so we can make sure that we're doing things properly, and if there's mistakes, we'll see them. So that's my perspective, but it's more from a huge company perspective than, I mean, I think a little company would be more likely to want them to be in their favor. So
I wonder if the auditors see it differently too, even in your company, where maybe like you want them to find the mistakes, but maybe they want you to look good so that they can still keep their job. I wonder if like you see it differently than they do.
Yeah.
that's very possible. I don't know. We go through audit so much, and they nitpick every single thing. Like, if you don't cross your I's and cross your T's and dot your I's, like they let us know, hey, this isn't right and this isn't right, and where's this? What's the action plan to fix that? And so I feel like they're really hard on us, which is a good thing because it makes the company perform better as a whole. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I can see where they have a different perspective than I definitely would. So
Yeah, and I wonder how often that happens where they see it differently, where on the other hand, the company wants them to be hard on them, like you said. So kind of interesting.
Could be how big the company is. Like
Yeah.
how well known by people, or could be.
Sure.
yeah, I know that how well, because Pepsi is huge on their image, and so any kind of all those financial scandals that they were talking about, like Enron and stuff, would be devastating to Pepsi's image, and so they don't want those kind of things to happen.
Do we want to go through each one of these questions and kind of talk about it?
Sure.
Sure.
You can read them. So the first one, and she says, the title of this unit is ethics, but according to the article you read, at least in the case of auditors, teaching auditors about ethics will not have any impact on bias. The author suggests education that helps auditors understand the unconscious errors they make and the reasons they make them. For business students and others who will not be auditors, what kind of education training would help future business professionals avoid bias, or is it pointless?
So I don't think it's pointless to teach about ethics and biasness because, I mean, if you don't know anything about it, you never learn about it. There's no way to even try and protect against it. You're still going to come across it. Like, I'm definitely biased towards the fleet department just because that's what I've always worked in, and I'm changing departments, or I have changed departments now, and so I have to I'm already catching myself where I'm like, well, why didn't you do this? Why aren't you doing that? And it's coming from a different perspective. So I think learning about the bias and ethics is definitely helps.
Yeah. And I think, like, even if you aren't auditors, I mean, like we discussed, is there's so many types of bias everywhere in the world. Like we see it so many times, and so being able to understand how being biased works and how to have kind of, well, I just need to make sure I take both of them into account and not necessarily be so biased can really help.
Yeah, like for them being like taught about it, like kind of have it tailored to their profession, because like auditors is basically for auditing, but kind of like give them examples like how they'll be facing bias in their everyday work or even personal lives too, depending on what you want to learn about, but kind of tailor it just for them, and also kind of like learn about these auditors that we learned, because then you have an idea what they're facing instead of just yourself, so you can learn more point of views.
Yeah, I think when you have a knowledge of it, like you go into the situations and you'll be able to recognize it easier than not knowing anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of that comes down on the business that's being audited too. Kind of like Pepsi, how they want to keep a good image. I think it goes back on the business professionals to like set that standard of, okay, we want a good public image, this is what we want. And then I think bias can go away a little bit because then people won't cut corners.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The next one. So the next one says the author suggests that the status quo, the universally accepted practice in the United States of how audit firms are hired, paid, and work with the companies they audit results in bad audits. Do we agree? Do we think when Congress passes the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, there weren't more radical reforms like the ones suggested by the authors? I think with reading the article, it talked about, we kind of talked about too, is there's some auditors that they will fudge numbers or fudge the report a little bit just so that the company they work for looks good. And so then the company will keep hiring them because they know that the certain audit will help them look good. And I think that's where people get the idea of bad audits, because companies are hiring people to audit that are biased towards their business, that are going to help them look better in the end.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I've read articles too where a company doesn't realize that the auditors are being biased, in their favor. And so they've used the same company for 10 years or whatever. And then they get a new auditor, even from the same company, and they totally flunk the audit. And so they go back and they're like, well, how did I pass all these audits for 10 years and then I failed this one? I haven't changed anything. So they ended up going back and suing the company for all those years of bad audits. So, you know, even though it was the same company, they just had a new auditor, someone with a new perspective. So it can definitely, the familiarity affects it. And then a lot of times the company won't realize that they're getting bad audits when it's a third-party auditor or even internal audits, because they just go off of what they give them.
Mhm.
Can somebody help explain what the Sarbanes-Oxley Act is? Because I kind of have a good idea, but I'm not quite for sure.
It basically just required that, like, more strict auditing, and it also required management to do regular audits of their own business. So, like, self-inflicted audits and then audits externally as well.
And part of it, I think, the management has to sign off the financial statements.
Mhm.
They have to sign them so then they show that they've looked at them and reviewed them and that they're accurate.
Yeah, so I get emails, or I would get emails quarterly with regards to Sarbanes-Oxley, making sure that the guys that I had reporting to me that had credit card access were still allowed to have access to those credit cards and are able to use them, and I'd have to approve them. And if I didn't get them approved, then their access would be cut off. And then I was constantly having to every period review the credit card statements and sign off on them. And if it was over a certain limit, I would have to escalate it to my boss to get approval. So the more money spent, the higher the authorization has to go within the company.
Nathan has so much experience.
It comes in handy sometimes.
Very much. Any other comments on that question?
No.
Okay. The next one says, this article is specifically about auditors, but most of the studies are about human nature in general. And a few are specifically about lawsuits. Do you think the bias that was discovered for plaintiffs and defendants leads to a flawed legal system? Why or why not? What are the advantages and disadvantages of a system where a lawyer is hired to advocate on behalf of her client?
I mean, there's definitely bias in the legal system. I don't think it's flawed because of that. Because they pull in a jury and a judge who, like, they do their best to make them not biased. And so you kind of pit two biases against each other and see who's winning. So I don't think it makes the system flawed. I think it makes it work better because you can get perspectives a lot cleaner, seems like.
Yeah, if I needed a lawyer, I'd want one that was biased towards me.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I mean, if it's a legal matter, you don't want to go to jail or anything. So why would you get someone who wasn't biased towards you? So
True.
as far as lawyers go, I think they need to be biased towards their clients.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, it sucks when they're biased towards criminals, but I mean, that's what makes it fair, I think.
Mm-hmm. The next question says, can you think of situations outside of auditing where there are lots of opportunities for bias? What could you do to change that situation?
I think Brody gave a perfect one where it's biased towards product. Like I'm biased against Ford. I don't like Fords.
Same here.
That's a personal thing and now that I've gotten older, I really could care less, but I've been so against Ford my whole life that I could never let down. If I ever bought one, I could never live it down from anybody. I would never hear the end of it. So even though I could care less now, I have to keep that biased. So
Yeah, that's true.
I think that can be a problem because sometimes you spend more money or you get lower quality or not necessarily the best product you could get because you're anti-Japanese vehicles or whatever. You don't like Heinz or whatever the product is.
Right.
So
That's how I am. I'm all Apple, and my husband hates Apple because he's just like, it's just so much money. And I was like, I can't go with anything else because I have an iPad, I have a MacBook, I have an iPhone. It's like I have to stay on this course. I can't steer away from it. And I think we could change the situation if both of us were more open to trying new things or looking into things a lot more and not being so shut out from other ideas, I guess.
Yeah, I guess researching the product, make sure it is the best quality or than the comparing actually.
Yeah. Mhm. Next one says, if you were an accounting major, what will you do? What will you do about what you learned from reading this article? Who's an accounting major?
anybody accounting?
I am.
Yeah.
All right. What are you going to do after reading this? Are
Change my name.
you going to go buy a Galaxy, Carly?
No. I'm not. I'll go buy an Apple phone for my husband, though. No. Oh.
I think something I would do if I was to audit, and I'm not planning on it, but if I was to audit, I'd make sure I'm very careful in the contract to make it like a long-term contract like they suggested in the reading so that I can just like do my own thing without worrying. So yeah.
To make things appear better so you can get a job next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. What's this one?
Well, I'm not an accounting major, but I do audits and stuff of people's work and performance and also financial statements sometimes. And one thing that I've kind of learned from reading it is the timing of interpreting information. So companies want to recognize their revenue as early as possible and their expenses as late as possible. And so that's something to that makes a difference, and you have to account for. So better learning how the timing affects things is something I'll take away from this for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The last one. Why do you think it's so difficult to overcome bias even when you know about it?
I think a couple of you guys have mentioned it. I mean, it's just you've gone with something for so long, and even though you know you're biased towards it, it's kind of hard to overcome that when you've found things that you like. I don't know. That's how I am. I have a hard time changing over to things when I like something.
I could go to the same restaurant and I get the same thing every single time.
I'm the same way, so.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult to overcome because we like it. That's what you're saying.
It works. Why change something that works?
And I think sometimes too, once you, even if you don't realize initially you're biased, if you've been biased for too long, it's hard to go back and like, oh, I was wrong back then, and now I'm going to fix it. But it's, you don't want to, people don't want to admit they were wrong. So
Yeah, no one does.
Or even like in the article they said that when an auditor or when someone makes a mistake, they're not going to go back and tell everybody they made a mistake. They're just going to keep kind of like making an image look good. Was that in the article?
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. I think it's true. There's just so much bias, and some of it we just don't realize that we're being biased. It gets more of just how we live life. It's how we see life as it is. So that didn't take us an hour. So anybody else have anything to say? Yes. Would we say that bias is a big issue in everyday situations, or is it, do we kind of just brush it off? Is it, who cares?
I don't think as a general rule it's a big deal. It definitely can become one, I think, especially when it has legal implications or financial implications. But you being biased towards Apple, me hating Fords, it doesn't matter. But you hear on the news lately all about, the police force is biased against blacks. Whether that's true or not, that is a bias that is bad,
Yeah.
and you'd want to fix. So I think it depends on what the bias is of.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, humans have been biased, I'm pretty sure, forever. It's just how we are.
It's nothing new. Anything else anyone wants to talk about? Do you feel like we covered it kind of pretty well?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So somebody just needs to. We just need to write a paragraph, right?
So what do we think was the most important insight from our discussion?
I think, especially like relating to the topic or the article we read, what you said just barely about bias isn't necessarily a bad thing in everyday situations, but it can be a bad thing when having a legal something legal is attached to it. I think that's a really important important thing to understand.
Okay. I mean, I'll go ahead and write and submit the paragraph. Anything else we want to add in there?
You want to, sorry, I'll be quiet. You want to say something?
Just it can be used in certain times, but not all the time. Basically, what you said.
Only as long as you're not buying Ford.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it'd be good to talk about the question we talked about. Are lawyers being biased? Does this create a law system? I think that'd be good, something good to put in there.
Okay.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. And also, like, it's important to learn about, like, everyone should at least have an idea about bias and how it affects them and other things.
Anything else? Do we need to add the link to it, or just to write the paragraph? Anybody know?
Let me. I don't know.
I think it just says a paragraph, but
That's what
It says just a paragraph.
I think so.
Could be safe to write it in, or
Yeah, I wouldn't.
But yeah, it wouldn't
Got
hurt
it.
to put it in.
I'm gonna say, go ahead and send it to me, and we'll just hear it, because other groups posted their discussions.
Okay.
So maybe I'll write and submit the paragraph if you want to just submit the. If you want to submit the Hangout, Carly, and then I don't think they need to
Submit
be.
it to the paragraph place, or do you want me to send it to you?
just
I'll submit the. Go ahead and send it to me, and I'll just submit it all as one.
Okay.
So.
That sounds good.
Cool. Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
yeah,
Sorry I missed last week.
it's all right.
It's all right.
Glad your moving went
You were
well.
busy.
Yep, move's good, life's good. So,
Good, good.
Cool beans.
Okay, well, I will send that to you, Nathan.
all right, you guys have a good night.
Until
Okay, you too.
All right, you too.